Hi, you're watching part 3 of a series of videos I've made about Sheila LaBarre. I haven't filmed one of these in over a year. I know it's the 1, 2, 3, 4. I know this is the 5th video that I filmed ever, but still it's been a year since I've filmed because I've been quite sick. So I do not feel confident at all speaking. I'm going to try and keep it as natural as possible. If you haven't seen the other two, I would strongly suggest you go back and watch them first. But if you like hearing stories that start from the middle, I will just learn to mind my business. The cat is judging me. The cat is judging me. March 26th, 2006. Sheila watches customers go in and out of a local pet store. She waited until a pair of children walked into the store and followed behind them. Donald and Amy, the two siblings, walked around the shop looking for a pet to take home. Sheila approached the two and offered them $100 to take care of her rabbits. Little Satin, Sapphire, and Snookster. Donald and Amy asked Sheila to show them the other bunnies, so she guided them out to her car. The children were overjoyed that they would be bringing 3 pets home. Sheila knew it would be a lot for them to carry on their walk home, so she offered the pair a ride. So Sheila gave the children a lift back home, and when they got there, she introduced herself to their mother, Pam, and their family friend, Sandra. Sheila chatted to them all about the farm, about how beautiful it was. She had rabbits and horses running freely, and all of that was shattered when the evening news came on and a story came up of her farm being searched, which Sheila did not expect at all. So she flipped and told Pam and Sandra about her boyfriend Adam, who was sick and who was a paedophile. She said she'd discovered this and they'd started having issues. I don't think you'd start having issues when you discover your boyfriend is a paedophile. I feel like the relationship ends effectively. I actually think that's a fairly mature way to look at it, because I think if I found out that my partner was a paedophile, we wouldn't have issues because they wouldn't be a partner anymore. But I guess you shouldn't really judge unless you're in that situation. But she insisted that she had nothing to do with Adam's disappearance and that she'd been set up by the police. She said, "They're out to get me. I have to get this. I need to take this to the press. The police, they hate me. Always have. The fucking chief has been out to get me for years. Wouldn't let me get a permit for a handgun. Imagine, me alone on the big farm with no way to protect myself. There are people trespassing all the time. There's an Irishman, an immigrant, who's been through my woods looking for me. Hunters coming through with guns. That arsehole chief didn't fucking want me to protect myself. That's because he fucking wanted me vulnerable, that son of a bitch. He wants to fuck me. I can tell." The next morning, Sheila asked Pam to look after her animals for her. The 3 women went to Walmart and Sheila bought a black blouse, jacket and skirt, a bottle of hair dye, a burner phone and a prepaid card. They went to a lawyer's office, but Sandra and Pam stayed in the car. Sheila came out looking nervous, said that the lawyer had asked for a $60,000 retainer. They went to the bank next and Sheila closed her account and withdrew everything. $85,778.21. "I'm being set up for this. I'm being set up for a murder and I didn't do it." The woman noticed that none of the news reports had mentioned murder. They next went to a gas station and the 3 got out of the car. Sheila stared at the people around them. She said, "Oh yeah, that's right. You know who I am." Pam and Sandra were confused at this because none of the reports about the farm so far had named Sheila or showed her photo. "That's right, it's me, and I'm innocent." They went to the bank to notarise a document that Sheila had written, giving Sandra authority to manage and access 3 addresses of rental properties in Somersworth, along with any keys and vehicles on the site of the farm. They then had to make another stop as Sheila's nerves quickly turned into diarrhoea. Sheila then insisted on going to the farm to feed the horses. The 3 women drove down the winding roads that led to Sheila's farm. Pam and Sandra had fantasised about what Sheila's farm looked like from the stories that she had told them, envisioning green pastures and horses frolicking in the grass. They arrived instead to a home surrounded by dirt and yellowing grass. The rabbits were covered in mud and looked dishevelled. The gate was wonky and covered in police tape. Some horses in trailers passed them on the road, and Sheila recognised that they were her horses. So they turned the car around and pulled the trailers over. The guy driving the trailer told them that the horses had been seized by the police and that if they wanted them back, they needed to go and talk to the police about it. Sheila told both the women that she was adamant that she was going to get those horses back, and they got into the car to go to the police station. As soon as the women got into their car, the man called the police and reported that a silver car was on its way to the police station, gave them the licence plate number. In the late afternoon of the 28th of March, Pam and Sandra dropped Sheila off at a nearby cemetery where she could hide behind some tombstones and pulled into the parking lot of the police station. New Hampshire State Police Trooper Jill Rocky and Assistant Attorney General Peter Odom had been expecting the 2. Immediately, Pam asked if she could have her horses back and pulled out the bill of sale. Jill just ignored the request and asked questions about Sheila, to which Pam and Sandra told the officer they dropped Sheila off, but they would never tell her where. Peter asked if Sheila thought she was wanted and explained to the women that they just wanted to know that she was all right, and their main concern was just to find Kenny. Pam and Sandra had been running around all day to help Sheila, but she wasn't in any trouble. The 2 told Pam that she could have her horses back in a few weeks. Pam and Sandra, pretty pleased with themselves, came back to tell Sheila that she would get her horses back and that she wouldn't be arrested. And Sheila's reaction was the opposite of what they expected. She started hyperventilating and demanded Pam's keys and told them to get back in the car. Sheila pushed down on the accelerator, told them that the police were trying to trick them and that she had to get out of Epping. Pam and Sandra were really frightened. Sheila was swerving all over the road and driving chaotically. After a while, she slowed down because she thought she was in the clear, but then a police car pulls out in front of her and another one pulls in behind her, and boxes are in. 2 officers stepped out of each car and informed Sheila LaBarre that they had a warrant to search her person. They found nothing on her but decided to bring her back to the station anyway for questioning. Pam and Sandra first intended to wait for Sheila, but after a couple of hours apparently they figured that she'd contact them if she needs them, which is just as well because Sheila was interrogated for 7 hours, but she didn't admit to anything. So without a confession or any evidence, they had to let her go until they could find something that linked her to Kenneth County's disappearance. Now, the police said in that interview that she was really flirtatious and sexually explicit and quite inappropriate as to what you'd expect normally if you were being questioned on a person's disappearance. They also said that they found it really hard to keep her on track. She'd keep digressing and going into lots of different topics. Makes hand gestures about what her and Kenny did in the car when they first met, and leaning in to the police officer when she was answering his questions. She kept going into lots of unrelated details and kept going down different avenues and topics, and eventually the police officer got quite frustrated with her because she was trying to deflect from answering any of his questions. But she refers to Kenny as Adam in this interview, and she also calls him a candy-taking nutcase, but says she still loves him, but he's a paedophile. Candy-taking nutcase. In the end, the interrogation got quite heated and Sheila ended up pounding her fists on the table. But ultimately, they didn't have anything on her and had to let her go. They dropped her off at a nearby hotel under surveillance. Somehow, she managed to slip under the radar and started walking towards the highway. The next morning, Steve Martinello was driving south on the interstate when he spotted an attractive woman waving at cars as if to flag one down. Cautiously, he stopped and the woman approached the car smiling and said a friendly hi. She told him she just broke up with her boyfriend and needed to get to Boston. She would pay him if he gave her a ride. What the hell, he thought, he's going in that direction. Steve told her he needed to make a stop by his ex-wife's place, and the woman didn't mind. She was hungry and wanted breakfast anyway. Steve started the car and asked the woman what her name was. I'm Casey. Casey told him that he looked like a biker, smiling at him. I like bikers. Steve dropped Casey off at a restaurant and told her he'd be back to pick her up after he was done. She kissed him on the cheek and smiled. I know you will, Angel. Steve was hooked. When he returned, Casey was busy writing on some paper, but when she looked up and saw him, she beamed. They got back in the car and Casey handed him a couple of hundreds for gas. She needed to post a letter, so they stopped nearby. She had in her hand a coffee-stained envelope. She couldn't find the post office and said that they should go, flirting with him that the cops might see you and give you trouble. Casey told Steve she was on her way to Boston as she was in some tax trouble and was going to meet the lawyer who defended O.J. Simpson. Steve pointed out some police cars parked up the road, seemingly on the lookout for something. Casey quickly asked, "Can I sleep in the back? I haven't slept in 2 days." She dozed for a while, not fully asleep. As the car crossed into Massachusetts, she opened her eyes. Steve apologised when he realised she was awake, as he'd forgotten her name. She replied, "Sheila," before a look of panic on her face, and she quickly added, "But you can call me Casey. That's my middle name." After a while, Sheila asked him to stop at a drugstore. She went inside and he dialed the number for the New Hampshire police. He knew that something wasn't right. But before he could give the details, she came back out, waving a box of condoms at him and grinning, and in a panic he dropped the call. She pointed to a hotel and directed Steve to get a room with a king-size bed. And they went to the room, and after a little while, Sheila climbed on top of him. When she took off her clothes, Steve could see that she was covered in bruises and cuts. She kept talking to him, saying, How does it feel to have sex with a tight little pussy that's an angel?" He said there was something about her that just really scared him, and apparently after she had an orgasm, she immediately replaced the condom and told him to have sex with her again. And after they were done, Sheila instructed Steve to flush these condoms down the toilet, said to him that if you don't, then the hotel maids will get them and impregnate themselves with them. Sheila, no. She sat down on the bed and told Steve, "I had a boyfriend who had child pornography. Can you believe that?" She told Steve that she'd found a picture that he'd had and she'd turned it into the police, who in turn had apparently got rid of it. So the police had apparently covered it up for him. So Sheila said that in her mind, all police were paedophiles. As Steve said, at this point, he was really, really uneasy and he was just looking for a way to get out of the situation, which is fair enough, because I can imagine that if I went and hooked up with someone and they just started coming out with all this psychotic shit afterwards, well, I mean, I wouldn't have got there in the first place because she seemed fucking strange enough before the hotel. But you can understand where he's coming from. And this was further confirmed by her saying to him, "One time I died and they brought me back to life. When I was dead, I talked with God and the apostles. They spoke to me in Hebrew and said, 'Vengeance is mine, says the Lord.' And that's when I was sent back as an angel." You had sex with an angel, Steve. Now, at this point, he was like, "I'm getting the fuck out of here." Steve was putting his clothes on, getting ready to leave. But she carried on and said, "Steve, what if someone touched your son?" At that point, he got defensive and looked at her and said, "What are you talking about?" And she said, "Serious, if somebody touched your son, would you kill them?" And he thought about it and replied honestly, "Yeah, probably I would." Now, Sheila leans in closer and says to him really intensely, "God said that all paedophiles have to die. God told me all paedophiles have to die." Now, before Steve could leave, Sheila asked for his number. She wrote it down backwards to keep it a secret. And when he looked confused, she said to him that, "My boyfriend is very influential. If you tell anybody about today, he'll come back and hurt you." Now, why he hasn't done this already, I don't know. But at this point, Steve was like, "I'm getting the fuck out of here." And he made for the door. Now, I don't know why he hadn't done this already, but at this point, Steve's like, I'm getting the fuck out of here. So he makes for the door. And he can hear from behind him Sheila calling out, can you score me some pot? Steve's already out the door, so he's escaped. So he just shouts, nope, and he slams the door shut. Later that evening, Sheila's photo appeared on Steve's TV screen. The reporter mentioned that years ago she'd been arrested for stabbing her boyfriend in the head with scissors. Steve picked up the phone and dialed for the New Hampshire police. Fuck. On the 30th of March, Kenneth Washington pulls up beside a woman with dark red hair at a strip mall in Boston, Massachusetts, and rolls down the window. The woman introduces herself as Casey, says she's here in Boston on a real estate deal, and she gets into the car. They cruise around the neighbourhood and they pick up some weed, and Sheila also buys them some food. They pull into a nearby Marriott hotel. Casey tells Kenneth to go and get a room, and they spend the night together smoking and having sex. The next morning, they woke up and Casey invited Kenneth to breakfast. Kenneth's thinking, I don't have a job. There's this nice woman here and she's paying for everything and she wants my company. So he goes to breakfast with her. He was having so much fun that he didn't ask her any personal questions and didn't even ask her what her last name was. And they checked back into a motel later that day. On the 31st of March, Casey left Kenneth and went to the hairdresser's, came back with a long bob, and they spent another night together, doing much the same as they did the first night. Back in New Hampshire, the letter that Sheila posted arrived at Pam's door. Just as Pam had finished reading it, a knock came from the door, and it was the police. Pam was outraged that she was under surveillance, but allowed the police to take the letter into evidence on the condition that she would have a photocopy of it. Armed with a photocopied letter, Pam and Sandra made their way straight to the TV station. The police received a tip-off that the media had the letter and would be reporting it in full, and the chief called Kenny's mother, Carolyn, to warn her of the contents. The letter was bizarre. It was an exoneration and an accusation aimed at Carolyn and Kenny. Sheila had listed every family member that Kenny had confessed to molesting. She'd centred the letter around her animals and the police. An egregious act of injustice had been done to her, and she was a victim. The letter ended with, please release this to the TV news only if you decide, and please do not give it to the police, ever. You know they can't be trusted. That day, Kenny's family were informed that the missing persons case had become a homicide investigation. It was more than likely that Kenny was dead. Of course, this news was met with shrieks of disbelief, tears, and cries. That night, a 7 p.m. special news bulletin reported that Sheila LaBarre was wanted for the charge of first-degree homicide. A national manhunt for Sheila was now in progress. On the 1st of April 2006, 5 days after Sheila was released from the police station, she stopped at a newspaper stand and studied the front page. Her eyes, smudged with eyeliner, looked back at her. The headline read, Woman wanted in killing, burning. Casey suggested to Kenneth that they move on, and he took her to a different hotel in the area. He signed into the room for her and then left to hang out with his cousin. They played video games and watched the Final Four March Madness. When the game ended, the news came on. Kenneth glanced over and saw Casey's mugshot come up on the screen. Ah, shit. On the 2nd of April 2006, Kenneth told Casey that something had come up and he couldn't meet her that morning. She told him to meet her later outside the Taco Bell. Kenneth then called round to 3 different police stations, and none of which seemed interested. Kenneth washed his hands of it. In his head, he tried. A police officer out on his break, Steve Moscato, had earlier picked up a call from Boston about the sighting of LaBarre and had gone to check it out, but nobody was there. But something didn't sit with him, so he returned to the restaurant. He could see standing outside a woman pacing on the phone, looking uncomfortable. She wasn't blonde like the bolo description, but everything else matched. Moscato called into the station. I got her, and called for extra units. One of the units pulled up next to Sheila and asked her name. She didn't look like a sex worker, but she looked like she had nowhere else to be. Casey Washington. The officer noted that she had a southern accent, not a Boston accent, and asked to check her bag. She declined. He asked her if she had something on her that she shouldn't. In defeat, she handed him over the paper bag she was carrying. Inside was some real estate newspaper clippings, some weed, and a whole bunch of money. The officer asked her if she was Sheila LaBarre, to which she shook her head. The officer pulled out the wads of bills out the bag and again asked her name. Casey Washington. The officer asked the other patrolman if any of them had the day's paper on them. He turned to the page that he'd seen earlier and held the picture up next to her. Look, is this you or not? Sheila finally admitted, Yeah, that's me. The game was up.
Gotcha, bitch!
The media swarmed Silver Leopard Farm. Neighbours shut the door in their faces, reluctant to talk to them. One woman shut the door whilst mumbling to herself, She is evil. Some would politely describe Sheila as difficult and confirm that her relationships with her neighbours were strained. Later on, it transpired that they were too afraid to speak out about her. Sheila had a habit of talking her way out of situations. She could have talked her way out of the murder charge, and if she'd seen them speaking bad about her on TV, then they would have faced repercussions. But at 8:30 a.m. on the 3rd of April 2006, Sheila LaBarre enters Chelsea District Court. The hearing was short and the council did not object to her extradition back to New Hampshire, and Sheila remained expressionless throughout. On the drive back to New Hampshire with Chief Dodge, Sheila was in a good mood and was asking the officers, Do you think they'll make a movie about me? She was comparing the actresses that she would like to play her character. During the investigation, police had contacted Lynn, Sheila's sister, for background details. This was the first time they heard the name Michael Deloge. One time, during one of Sheila's rants about the New Hampshire State Police, she told Lynn about an encounter where an officer had chastised her for having a homeless man live with her, who had moved into the farm around 2004 for around 2 years by the name of Michael. The officer asked Lynn, Where is he? And she replied, You tell me. Sheila hadn't told Lynn much about Michael, just that he'd suddenly left. Around the same time, a family from Somersworth had reported to the press about their son Michael, who'd worked on the farm and hadn't been seen since. Michael Deloge, born the 29th of March 1968, grew up in West Haven, Connecticut. He was a thin, tall man that was described as the clown. He loved a joke and he wanted to be a musician. He'd battled some demons and he struggled with substance abuse. Michael had struggled to stay on track, but things looked promising when in 1993 he married his girlfriend and had a son, but she later left him, cutting all ties, and Michael found his solace once again at the bottom of the bottle. During one of the many attempts from James, Sheila's ex-boyfriend, to escape the farm in 2004, he'd hitchhiked to a homeless shelter in Portsmouth and struck up a friendship with Michael, which sealed his fate. Sheila had tracked James down, as she always did, and came to the shelter and found him with Michael. She took a liking to Michael and took him back with them for dinner. Michael loved the idea of the farm. The last time that James had escaped, she'd come back to the shelter looking for him. When he was nowhere to be found, she saw Michael and instead invited him back to the farm. Michael told his parents that he was in love and he was being taken care of. But as the year went on, Michael would tell his parents that there were problems. Sheila had Michael sign power of attorney over to her and made his checking account a joint account. Michael was only allowed to visit his mother on the condition that he did not hug or kiss her. One day, Michael's stepmother, Joy, took a phone call. Immediately, a shrill voice buzzed out of the speaker. How could you do that to your son? What? How could you molest your son like that? You'll burn in hell. The shrieking woman started quoting scripture, never identifying herself, and Joy hung up the phone, confused. The phone rang again, but Joy let it go to voicemail. That evening, Joy played the message back to her husband. It was Sheila screaming at Michael that he'd molested his brother and sister and that he was going to go to hell for all of his sins. Now, no matter where Michael was in his life, he would always call his father to wish him a happy birthday without fail every year. And Michael's father planned to bring up the message later with Michael on this day, except that never happened. His birthday came and went and there was no word from him. Because this was so out of character, instead of being angry, Michael's father was just worried about him. And when he saw the news about Kenny and the farm, he turned to Joy and said, That would explain why Michael never called me on my birthday. I know Sheila's killed him. I know it. Now, Lynn, Sheila's sister, had told the officers that Sheila would never register her phone because she was too scared of prank calls. At the time of Kenny's disappearance, Michael Deloge was still registered in the phone book as being at the farm's address in Epping. He was last seen alive in 2005, aged 37 years old.